But we begin with Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce. He is, in the words of the ABC, under a long white cloud tonight. He's just the latest politician to potentially fall foul of the country's tough dual citizenship laws. After receiving advice, he may be a New Zealand citizen by descent. Mr Joyce is the leader of the National Party, the junior partner, of course, in the centre-right Liberal National Coalition government that has just a single seat majority in Parliament. Under the Australian Constitution, people with dual citizenship cannot stand for federal election. And it seems it was the New Zealand Labour Party which played a key role in bringing that to Mr Joyce's attention. We begin, before we go live to Canberra, with our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Minister of Internal Affairs, Peter Dunn, says his department started looking into the possibility Barnaby Joyce was a New Zealand citizen last week, and once that was confirmed, passed it on to Australia via the High Commission in Canberra. He says Mr Joyce's father was a New Zealand citizen, and he passed citizenship on to his son.
It's automatically passed on. I don't know whether he knew or not. He says he didn't know. He says he was under the belief that his father had renounced the New Zealand citizenship. But the fact is it's all irrelevant. If he was eligible to receive the citizenship at the time, under our legislation, he does, regardless of his subsequent circumstances.
Barnaby Joyce addressed the Australian Parliament this morning, saying he was alerted to the situation by New Zealand authorities.
Last Thursday afternoon, the New Zealand High Commission contacted me to advise that, on the basis of preliminary advice from their Department of Internal Affairs, which had received inquiries from the New Zealand Labour Party, they considered that I may be a citizen by descent of New Zealand.
Mr Joyce says he was shocked when he got the information.
Neither I nor my parents have ever had any reason to believe that I may be a citizen of any other country. I was born in Australia in 1967 to an Australian mother. I think I am fifth generation. My father, who was born in New Zealand, came to Australia in 1947 as a British subject. In fact, we were all British subjects at that time.
Peter Dunn says the law in Australia is clear.
You cannot be a citizen of another country at the time that you are elected to Parliament in Australia. It doesn't say knowingly or unknowingly. It doesn't say whether you wanted to be or not. It just simply says you cannot be. This is a matter for Australia, not New Zealand, but if you like, the protests that people were unaware that they were, or that they didn't mean to be, or they didn't think they were, under the Australian Constitution, that is absolute.
But Mr Joyce says, based on the legal advice the government's had from the Solicitor-General, he's confident he won't be disqualified from parliamentary service, but wants the High Court to make a final ruling.
To provide clarification to this very important area of the law, for this and future parliaments, I have asked the government to refer the matter in accordance with Section 376 of the Commonwealth Electoral Act to the High Court. Given the strength of the legal advice the government has received, the Prime Minister has asked that I remain Deputy Prime Minister and continue my ministerial duties.
Peter Dunn says he understands Mr Joyce has already filed papers to renounce his New Zealand citizenship, but that won't have any bearing on his eligibility for Parliament. Mr Dunn says the crucial point is that he was a New Zealand citizen at the time he was appointed to Parliament. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Let's go live now to Canberra, where we're very kindly joined by ABC political reporter Jane Norman. Jane, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. This is kind of bonkers, isn't it? And
it is.
In the context of the Liberal National Coalition having a one-seat majority, it's almost absurd.
Yeah, this has really raised the stakes this afternoon. As your listeners are probably aware, over the past couple of months, we have been kind of engulfed in this weird constitutional conundrum here in Australia, because this pesky Section 44, which effectively bans any MPs who may be dual citizens from sitting in Parliament. Now, the idea of that originally was so that a person's allegiance couldn't be tied. You know, you can only have allegiance to Australia to sit in the Australian Parliament. But there have been this is now the fifth case in this Parliament which has sort of raised questions about an MP's dual citizen, and in all five cases, none of the MPs knew they were dual citizens at the time. Now, in some of the cases, they're pretty clear-cut because those MPs were actually born in another country, so perhaps they would at least have reason to go back and check. But in Barnaby Joyce's case, as is the case with his colleague Matt Canavan, a national senator, both of them have had a country's citizenship unwittingly conferred on them And so if you look at the constitutional section sort of in black and white, it looks like they've breached it, but then that issue of like citizenship by descent hasn't actually been tested by the High Court, but it will be very, very soon.
So what happens now? So this is going to the High Court?
It certainly will. So Barnaby Joyce made the sort of shock revelation this morning that he is in fact referring his own case to the High Court. So Parliament has now sort of done the formalities and that will now happen. So the High Court will now, basically decide whether he has in fact breached this section of the Constitution, Section 44, and if so, it'll rule him, ineligible to stand and disqualify him from Parliament. But he reckons he's got some pretty strong legal advice that because this citizenship had been sort of unwittingly conferred on him, that he's on quite strong legal grounds, but I don't think any constitutional experts would have quite the same confidence, given that the High Court has never ruled on such a case like this before.
It's absolutely fascinating. I can hear lovely noise in the background. Is everyone?
Question time still going on here, so yeah, it's a pretty rowdy office.
Yeah, well, it's set everyone off, obviously. So this lovely phrase, unwittingly conferred. We unwittingly confer you a New Zealander, Barnaby Joyce. What will Malcolm Turnbull doing? What he must be just sitting there very dry in the mouth, is he?
Well, I mean, Malcolm Turnbull was one of the biggest critics of the a couple of weeks or months ago when two Greens senators revealed that they were, in fact, dual citizens at the time of election. They both resigned at the very point that they found out because they said that, they're not eligible to stand. So their cases have also gone to the High Court, but they kind of resigned before any sort of outcome. And at the time, Malcolm Turnbull was very critical, saying that, they should have done their due diligence. You've got to tick a box when you sit for Parliament saying that you have, in fact, complied with Section 44. So in this case, perhaps the old phrase of people in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones is pretty relevant. But Malcolm Turnbull has just told Parliament that he too believes that Barnaby Joyce is safe. He thinks the High Court will find that he's eligible to stand. Very confident, he said, in the Solicitor General's advice. But, like I say, it'll all be up to the High Court to ultimately decide this one.
Jane Norman joining us live from Canberra. Thank you very much, Jane, as the ABC political reporter. What an absolutely fascinating story. Obviously, we will keep an eye, along with everyone in Australia, of course, on what happens in the High Court as Barnaby Joyce sets out to get a ruling in his favour.